We are back with part 3 of our asynchronous lecture for week 3 of digital media literacy and tackling some questions from Elizabeth. Is it Liz? I've had this breakthrough thought that I feel like I need answers to. Tackling some questions from Elizabeth. Why are people so drawn to the media and internet? Okay, what's going on with that? And I'm reminded of that phrase, and this is a partial phrase, right? So it would be follow it up with a web search for full context. But the old phrase, like moths to the flame, right? People are drawn to certain types of things. But I often think about that flames reference because of that nature of insects being drawn to light sources that may or may not harm them. Okay, and so anytime we get into conversations of digital technology, part of that channel of appeal is it's not just what's on the screen, but it's the screen itself, okay? The LED lighting or the portability, the mobility of the device, right? The accessibility of the device of what was cable, but then is streaming, okay? All of these, and so what I'm reminded of anytime we enter that terrain of conversation is one of our forefathers of thought in media studies, and that would be, of course, Marshall McLuhan. And as always, for those of you who've been around for a while, McLuhan's never too far away. He's haunting the background of our digital space. Okay, the physical and the digital. So just behind me, in fact, I have within arm's reach one of his most often cited and quoted works. The medium is the message, right? As the ominous eye of surveillance looks on, and so Elizabeth's deceptively simple question is actually covertly complex, right? Why are people so drawn to media and the internet? And I went spelunking once again, one of my favorite texts, and I'm not pulling these excerpts out of context because this particular work is very experimental. It's as full of visuals as it is thoughts. Okay, and so there's not a lot of full-blown context reading to it, which is kind of what makes it so dynamic. It's intentional, but it's also open-coded in some ways. So anyway, under the segment Your Government on page 22 of this particular text, and we do have the iconic recreation there of the American Gothic painting. I'm going to hop down to the middle. The public, in the sense of a great consensus of separate and distinct viewpoints, is finished. Finish him. Today, the mass audience, parentheses, the successor to the public, close parentheses, can be viewed as a creative, participating force. Oh, that gets me thinking about participatory culture, right? A term that Henry Jenkins adds to the conversation of media studies, and then evolves with the help of a couple of co-authors toward one of his newer texts, Spreadable Media. But back to McLuhan. The public, in the sense of great consensus of separate and distinct viewpoints, is finished. Today, the mass audience, successor to the public, can be used to create can be used as a creative participating force. It is instead merely given packages of passive entertainment. Politics offer yesterday's answers to today's questions. And so he's getting at this idea of our old ways of doing things are rapidly becoming outdated due to the imprint of mass media. All right, and so let me break down a little bit of context for you. McLuhan, this work, he is as much talking about the advent, the onset, the cultural impact of television, but we can easily update it to today and think about not just the advent, the onset of the internet and internet culture, but also social media specifically and the impact it's having on our traditional ways of doing things. So very, very informative. But to tie it back one more time to that moths to the flame comment that I added before, I also found an interesting a rumination by McLuhan where he writes, "We employ visual and spatial metaphors for a great many everyday expressions. We insist on employing visual metaphors even when we even when we refer to purely psychological states." Okay, such as tendency and duration, page 117. This gets me thinking about our conversation of memes, their power, they're simple, yet they're complex. Okay, they can easily become viral, but they're also disposable. You know, and it's so funny. You can create a meme to say anything you want. That's part of its mystique. That's part of the pleasure of breaking down the text, of decoding it when one comes across it. There's an encoding decoding process, Stuart Hall, that takes place. But then if the meme can be that malleable, it can easily be made to misinform, to deceive. And thus it becomes dangerous when so many political memes start circulating, false narratives completely filled with what we identify as logical fallacies. All right, but I didn't even get to that. I was leading up to this final quotation from page 117, Marshall McLuhan. "We are so visually biased that we call our wisest men visionaries or seers, like moths to the flame." Right? Good stuff. Thank you, Elizabeth, for sparking our curiosity this week. Are the, quote, arts, end quote, now considered as pop culture? As Denise writes on page 263. Well, once again, okay, so looking at Denise, this is a perfect setup. Note how your questions are aligning in directions that are leading us right toward having that conversation about Marshall McLuhan. And Denise, in that excerpt on 263, is quoting McLuhan, okay, one of his works, and noting that art as a popular entertainment can present information or express ideas about the world that people otherwise cannot or will not recognize. All right, so what they're trying to say is artistic expressions, popular culture, like art before it, it's a space. It can be a storytelling space or a communicative space. We study communication. A communicative space in which we express ideas that we're otherwise maybe unaware of or too afraid to discuss due to social norms, or all of the above, or something else entirely. But popular culture can be and does function at its best in that kind of space. That's important to consider. Those are the kinds of artifacts that we're probably most interested in examining, although there's that case to be made that broadly enjoyed popular culture is equally potent because it's received by mass audiences, and thus it's sending messages to the largest groups of people. So why not study both, right? I mean, come on. Let's devote a whole major to it. Someone get on that. Done. With the recent problems Facebook has faced, no pun intended, does anyone believe that it will be the #1 social networking website for much longer? follow-up question: will Mark Zuckerberg resign? Prognosticate. Oh gosh, it's an interesting speculative question here. For now, no. I think Zuckerberg is an active agent at trying to mitigate and navigate the issues they faced. First of all, he's an iconoclast. He's a trailblazer. All right, he just kind of smashes these distinctions between, zealot entrepreneur, but also someone that tries to kind of you know give the people the bread and circuses. So they're remarkable at counter messaging PR crisis. Okay, and I think there's a lot to be said for his ability to get out in front of things, to put a full page apology in, like a full page spread ad in the New York Times. It's like an apology letter. These types, they're taking steps. Have they crossed the ethical boundaries and created some actions that have consequences that cause their stocks and profits to tumble? Absolutely. But it's not at that point of, I don't think, yet, a point where someone better would be, stepping in and taking over. He is, in addition to sort of CEO founder, he is to Facebook even more than what Steve Jobs was to Apple. Arguably, someone can come at me with the counter argument there, and I'm more than willing to, absorb it and reflect on that. But back to the first question: will Facebook fall as that number one social networking website? I think this is an interesting question because the game changes constantly, and sometimes it's those unpredictable factors that surprise us. Okay, and that's probably what would be an inevitable pivot, would be some kind of alternative unpredictable factor for them. But for now, it's the most profitable social media website, and so long as it's the most popular social media website and the most profitable social media website, they will have no reason to alter their course except toward ways that further enhance their stickiness. And I think that's a great place to plug one of those key terms that our authors write so much about in spreadable media, is that stickiness factor. Facebook has become the stickiness factor, even if very young people, young teenagers or young people demographics are migrating away to alternative sites. Now that it has become normative, and I get to this in someone else's questions momentarily, it's become normative for us to gravitate toward the stickiness of a Facebook for information, for pics, for connection. Okay, so it's doing all of these things, and in the present, that's enough. Time will tell otherwise. Why, hey, devil's advocate, why is Wikipedia not considered a valid source? Because anyone can edit it, of course, right? We all use Wikipedia. This is what, there was a running bit on The Office, one of the early seasons, where Michael Scott's using Wikipedia. It's hilarious because it's honest, it's accurate. We all use Wikipedia, but because it can be manipulated, most of the time it's not, but it can be altered, and it does get altered constantly by anyone that has that access, then it should not function as a primary source. We can use it as a gateway to gain some information, insight, some directionality, right? It can push you in the next direction, but it's not offering that sort of primary source type of information that we need. All right. I'm going to cut it off there. Thrilling amount of information, questioning from Elizabeth, but we will jump back in with part 4 and move along to the next segment.